Welcome back. Well, last month was there was a week for OCD awareness. Now, OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, it's something that's a term that's often bandied around. If you look on social media, it's like, oh, I'm a bit OCD and what have you. It's interesting. Many people describe themselves as OCD. They might have obsessive behaviors, but obsessive compulsive disorder is a very, very different thing, indeed. Based on current estimates for the UK population, there are around 750,000 people living with OCD at any one time. And what we do know about OCD, it affects as many as 12 in every 1,000 people, from young children to adults, regardless of gender, social or cultural background. One young man who discovered that he had OCD the hard way, because people rarely think that they have OCD until life becomes unbearable. And that's kind of one of the parameters. Until you cannot live your life. I've done conferences on OCD. I remember in Australia where one woman literally couldn't get out of the house and for washing their hands. And that's the one thing, light switch touching, washing hands. Those are the ones that the obsessions everybody knows about. The obsessions that aren't talked about are voices telling you to do harmful things to yourself or to other people, on and on and on and on, non-stop, day and night, which literally drive you mad. And you have to do something in order to stop those voices. And you might not be able to carry those things through. And then you have the panic and the dread. My next guest is somebody who's seeking to shed a little bit of light and bring a different voice, I guess, to that. Sean Flores is an influencer and OCD advocate and joins me now. Sean, thank you so much for joining me. I hope I did, because as I said, on social media, you see people saying, oh, I'm a little bit OCD. And I kind of always think, if only you knew. Tell us about you and OCD. And because right at the beginning I said you don't automatically think, oh, I must have OCD. Most people go through hell and not understand what's happening to them. Then they get a diagnosis. Then there's all the grief and the feelings that come with that. Just tell us your story.
So yeah, thank you so much again for giving me a platform to speak about this very, very important, message. So for myself, for a very long time, I think my OCD started with checking the stove was off, checking that the doors were closed. I was worried I would go out to bed, for example, and come back down and be like, did I close the door? And I'd do it over and over. If I went outside, I'd come back and check that I closed the door. And it just had this intrusive worry. Then it moved to health anxiety, where I was constantly afraid that I had an STI or an STD, or I somehow contracted HIV. Then that fear left. Then it moved on to a sudden overnight fear via a dream that I had become gay overnight. And it was so irrational. There was nothing logical about it. So I started ruminating to the point my world got smaller and smaller and smaller. And in regards to the idea of voices, it was more my inner narrative that just kept going over and over, trying to find an answer to prove that I somehow had woken up a very different person. Then that fear moved on to harm OCD, which is another subtype. And what that meant was I was terrified I would harm myself and I would harm other people. So for example, I would be on a bus and a thought might pop up into my head, fight someone, and I would start panicking. I would have a full-blown panic attack and be terrified. And then it reached a point where I started having something called suicide OCD, which was the fear that I would take my own life. And that presented via an image of myself jumping off of a bridge. And I had called an Uber, became super depressed, called all my friends, and I looked them dead in the eye and I told them I no longer wanted to be alive. And my world shut down from there on in last year. And on Saturday, the 4th of June, I woke up and I said I couldn't do this anymore. And via the internet, I found a therapist called Emma Garrick, otherwise known as the Anxiety Whisperer. And I begged and I pleaded with her for a phone call. And when I finally had that phone call with her, she explained what I was going through was OCD, and my life changed from there on in.
So, wow. I mean, one thing that you touched on, that ruminating, it takes from your sleep, doesn't it? I mean, you're starting each day exhausted. It affects the way you talk to people, what your interaction. Tell me, when you say your world was shutting down, what things were so overwhelming you just couldn't be in company, or tell me about that.
So, for example, I'd be in the gym and just have constant running thoughts all the time. I would eat food and I'll just be so worried about something. I'd wake up in the morning, as you said, and thoughts would just be in my head from the minute I woke up to the minute I slept. And my world kept getting smaller because I was ruminating over and over again to find certain answers, to prove I wasn't this kind of person, to prove I wouldn't hurt people, to prove I wasn't suicidal. So for me, the outside world just became too much. I would talk to somebody and I would be full blown ruminating right in front of them, and they wouldn't know what was going on in my head, and I didn't know what was going on in my head. At one point I was convinced I was hearing voices, because I was like, why is my inner narrative so loud? It just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming over and over again.
And you can't hear what people are saying. You can't concentrate on what people are saying. You can't concentrate on watching the TV. You can't concentrate on anything. But this I call it like a tumble dryer going over and over and over and over again. And it's just noise that never shuts up.
Absolutely. For example, one of my favorite things to watch is martial arts. And thoughts would pop into my head, such as, you enjoy watching martial arts because those men are half naked. I'll be like, oh, here we go again. It was just constant over, as you said. A great analogy is a tumble dryer. Or another analogy I'd like to use, it's trying to find certainty in everything that you're doing without realizing that it doesn't matter. The content of your thoughts don't matter. But I didn't know that back then. So I would obsess over and over and over and over and over again. And OCD presents itself in so many different themes. Harm. There's unfortunately other types of OCD which are a little bit more taboo, but from what we currently understand, such as cleaning and symmetry OCD, comes from that show Obsessive Compulsive Cleaners on Channel 4, first aired in 2013, which was actually asked to be taken down by a charity called OCD UK, because it doesn't put into the real idea of how much OCD can torment individuals.
And also, it's also, I mean, hoarding. I mean, people can also have comorbidities, with other mental health issues on top of that. But yeah, everybody always thinks of OCD as putting their shoes nicely in a row. But it is that, Tara, I'm talking, okay. I mean, and there's a spectrum of OCD, and I have at times lived with it under times of stress. And mine was as a runner, and I had to get to the next lamppost before the next car, or someone in my family would definitely die. I mean, I knew it viscerally, and I'd be exhausted and I had to run to the next lamppost. The other one was the fourth step on my stairs in my childhood home. And even when I returned to that childhood home as an adult, I had a panic attack when I saw that fourth step. So I had to jump over that every fourth step. And I still have it, like seeing number plates and obsessively looking for words in number plates. But again, I've learned ways. They pop up during times of extreme stress, and I've been taught ways with cognitive behavioral therapy to change the narrative and use it sometimes in a positive way. Now, I'm one of the luckier ones because I'm kind of here. But it does, as you say, it can go to the point where some people never get out of their houses.
Absolutely. So to give your listeners and everybody else a real perspective on what OCD caused and the damage, there was a recent study done in 2023 that was published very recently, about a month or 2 months ago, that showed that the NHS, OCD costs the NHS 378 million a year, and that equates, if you bring into a societal perspective, they equate that to be about 5 billion, and that's a conservative estimate. It generally makes people's world smaller. And for a lot of people who don't have OCD, yes, we're able to look and realize that their behaviors are irrational, the behavior is very illogical, but it's the anxiety and the dread that comes with not performing, the obsessions, the rituals, whatever it might be, that people can't learn to live with. So like what you said, in periods of really hard stress, OCD can really flare up. It can change chop, do whatever it might be. And to really give people an understanding, OCD generally kills people. There's a lot of people who have taken their life as a result of OCD. And for someone like myself, I'm really lucky to be where I am, just the same as with you, because I know people who have suffered tormentously at the hands of obsessive compulsive disorder. And then there's a true need at this moment in time to really bring about new treatment to give people their lives back from obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah, and I know you're part of a group that is trying to do just that. And it's interesting that it's a multidisciplinary approach, because traditionally we think of mental health, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, psychoanalyst, a psychotherapist, what have you. But there are lots of things, aren't there? There's lifestyle, there's even diet, there's, one size doesn't fit all. Different people have different levels and different types of obsessions. And I know in the mental health world, we're trying to get to the point where it's like you wouldn't treat everybody who's got cancer in the same way. It's the same thing. You've got to have individual things going on. How is your life now?
So really interestingly, my OCD story is a little bit complex. This time last year, I didn't think I was going to be alive. I'm very lucky to be in the position that I'm in. And when I shared my story the first time on August the 14th last year, I never understood how much it was going to change people's lives. So many people around me, especially from the community, the Black community, came out and reached out to me and said they've been suffering with OCD as well. And they were happy to see somebody else Black speak about OCD. And I never, again, understood the magnitude that had on people's lives.
I think there's a lot of taboo within. We've got to be honest, there's a lot of taboo about mental illness amongst certain cultural groups, and amongst Black people there is still quite a lot of taboo and not talking about it, and a lot of people suffering in silence. So I can absolutely see why you'd be a shining light to them.
Yeah, so thankfully as a result of that, I was able to create a WhatsApp group now with about 60 of us who are Black with OCD from all across the world. I help everyone irrespective of race, class, gender, background. I've had hundreds of messages via my social media, Instagram, TikTok, all the media appearances that I've made. I'm hoping to eventually perhaps go on to become a therapist. So that's my ideal plan. I'm trying to make a 360 to really change people's lives, because again, a lot of people with OCD, they usually have to pay out of pocket for their treatment. And I'm sure you probably know this, that OCD treatment is not cheap. It's incredibly specialist, and it's an incredibly treatable disorder, whether it's via antidepressants, whether it's via lifestyle, whether it's via talk therapy. People need to have a chance to know that they can take their life back from obsessive compulsive disorder. And the work that I'm doing, there's a motto that I have, which was OCD was the worst thing to ever happen to me, and I'm determined to be the worst thing to ever happen to OCD. So that's why I do a lot of consultancy, a lot of peer support work. And recently I was on the OCD ward in St. George's Hospital, and it really came to the idea of how humanizing it could have been to, I could have potentially been on that ward for all I know. You really never know just what OCD does to people. So my life is a lot better than where it was last year, but I do still have a very long way to go.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. The point you made earlier is when you actually opened up to friends about how bad things were, because it's all dealing with all of those internal voices make you so frightened and so anxious that it's very difficult as well amongst certain cultures and certain age groups. It's not just, it's difficult to just say help, and to be heard. And you were lucky enough to have friends when you said help and they heard you. And I guess we have to understand that not everybody has that. So if somebody is listening and they want to go somewhere to get a bit more information, what do you generally tell them?
So I often do say to people, the very first thing to understand is you're not alone with OCD. I know OCD is one of those illnesses that can make people feel incredibly alone and alienated, but everybody on this planet has intrusive thoughts. As long as you're alive, your brain produces intrusive thoughts. It's just with us, we focus a bit too much. So the first thing I would have to say is understand that you're not alone. The second thing I would say is reach out to charities such as OCD Action, OCD UK. There's also International OCD Foundation, Triumph Over Phobia. These are some of the charities that I work with, and we're really trying to raise awareness. There's conferences, there's panels. You can come and get involved. another thing I really would suggest to everybody that lives with OCD or potentially they fear they may have OCD is find a support group, whether that's a support group full of individuals with OCD or other individuals with any other illness. It's incredibly important to build a community to reinforce what life can look like with illness, and that illness is not the end of your life. So that's a really important. I just say to people, come and reach out to me. I'm very open. I have my DMs are open. I reply to everyone. I've connected with so many people, hundreds of people at this point. So please don't be afraid to reach out. And there's no thought that you've had that I haven't had myself.
Sean, thank you so much for talking with us today. It's a really important subject, and you've been so eloquent and so honest about your own struggles. Sean Flores there, influencer and OCD advocate. Gosh, I'm very fortunate to have fantastic guests. I really am. We'll be back with more in a moment.